Thanks for tuning into Talking Point. I am your host, Neeraj Shah, with me is Tamanna Inamdar. And joining us today are the think tanks from Avendus, Andrew Holland, CEO, and Nandik Mallik, CIO of Avendus Capital Public Market Alternate Strategies. Gentlemen, thanks for taking the time out. And the idea of doing this conversation that me and Tamanna had was to try and assess what is the mood on the politics, what could the outcome possibly be. We'd love to know your thoughts and what's the impact on markets thereby as a result of it. Andrew, you think the markets are poised for policy continuity?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the market had those jitters a few weeks back on the low voter kind of outcomes at that time, but then obviously it increased. So markets have recovered from that kind of jittery kind of viewpoint. And now, you know, you're seeing more and more brokers come out with more positive views on where it could end. I think the market hasn't really had that pre-election rally. I think, you know, if the numbers, you know, turn out to be where the market's expecting, then I think you could still have that catch-up game with all the rest of the global markets, which have been hitting new highs. So I think there's still that extra leg for the market to go. And you mentioned the RBI, you know, this is just huge. And I don't know why the market's not picking up on this for the banking sector, for construction companies. You know, it's going to bring bond yields down, the bond inclusion with JP Morgan in June. This is liquidity that's being thrown in the market. So I just read a few reports today saying, will the government kind of reduce the fiscal deficit with this money? Will they spend more money? What a great problem to have. It's huge. I mean, they can do whatever they want. The key is this. No one was kind of saying the fiscal deficit was bad before. So why do they need to do that? They'll just spend.
Right. So your take on that debate is that come July, a new government comes in, the market's presuming that it's going to be for policy continuity,
yes.
So the same one, they come in with the war chest and they spend.
Yeah,
yeah.
Of course. Why wouldn't they? It's going to get that animal spirits with the private sector as well to start doing their own capex. The private capex will start to pick up. This will have a huge multiplier effect across the economy.
Nandik, you know, since we're talking about markets and elections right now, and I know everyone has an internal figure, and by everyone I mean everyone. So even those who track this for equities and even those who are just having fun. I'm wondering if there is an internal figure that you'd like to share, because the range is so wide. And do you think that the market is still pegging it to the campaign slogan at the start of the poll? Because that was the question, right? Char so par. Is there now a realization that, you know, you don't need to be fixated on that?
No, so I think markets are not factoring in somewhere around 400. A lot of noise has been made that maybe the numbers are lower. So I think market is factoring in a slightly modest victory for the incumbents. In my framework, however, 2019 seems to be a tougher election than 2024. The reason is in a key state of UP, you did not have the alliance this time. Last year, you had SP, BSP fighting together. And even then, the ruling party had 80% seats over there. This time, the alliance is not there. Another key state you have in the south, Karnataka, JDS was with Congress. This time, JDS is with BJP. So the starting point alliances are with the ruling front now. Even in Bihar, I think the alliances are better for the ruling alliance as compared to the opposition. So that's factor number one. Factor number two is we have 3 state elections in which the media forecasts were that the opposition would do well, but ultimately the ruling party came back 3-0. So you have these 2 factors, you know.
What about Maharashtra? Since you talked about alliances and you've talked about the ones which have been easy to predict, you've left the Maharashtra, which nobody knows what's going to happen. 48 seats there.
Correct. So people are focusing on Maharashtra, rightly so, because after UP, it's the second largest state in terms of the number of seats in Lok Sabha. Interesting point, which very few people have analyzed till now, is BJP is contesting on 28 seats in Maharashtra. And many of your audience would be surprised that of these 28 seats, BJP is in a direct contest with Shiv Sena, Uddhav Thackeray on 5 seats only. So technically on 23 seats, it's a BJP versus Congress or BJP versus NCP Sharad Pawar contest. And you know what the strike rate is when BJP and Congress contest against each other. So that's why Maharashtra also may not be as bad. if I can leave it at that.
Not as bad. Okay. And we'll get in Andrew's view on this, but just a follow-up, Nandik, on some of the other states. Tamanna is better at doing this, but I'm intrigued about two states in particular. A lot of talk about what BJP does in the south, and a lot of talk about what BJP could do in West Bengal relative to what they've done in the past, particularly 2019. Any thoughts there?
So, so if you divide the country into two parts, the north and the west, and then the east and the south, the general consensus is the ruling party is doing better in the eastern belt and the southern belt, and there could be some losses in the north and the west. So broadly, if you do these maths together, I don't see how the numbers of 2024 would be very different from the numbers of 2019. So see, Bengal is a very tricky state because it's basically two fronts contesting against each other. What will matter is whether the left has any vote share left. So if the left increases its vote share, then the dynamics could be slightly different. But again, last time they had 18 seats, the ruling coalition. Don't see them getting below 18 at least. So and everywhere it seems, even the people who are saying that in the north and the west there could be some losses, the consensus view is that in Bengal there could be some gains.
Tamanna, you picking that up as well?
Bengal is tricky, but Bengal is a greenfield area for the BJP, and in election after election, and in Bengal people even watch the Panchayat polls. In election after election, their vote share has been increasing. So Bengal is tricky. Andhra, I would just add to what you've been saying, could be the positive surprise for the BJP, because that tie-up with Chandrababu Naidu might really work out well. So yeah, I would broadly agree.
Andhra is very interesting because Andhra Lok Sabha elections happened together with the
yeah,
assembly elections.
and it had great voter turnout as well.
Correct.
So that I would.
So the argument about voter turnout being low, it's been uniform throughout the country in the initial phases. So it's not that in the areas in which the ruling party is strong, the turnout was low. If you look at Kerala, for example, it's been the lowest turnout in the last 40 years. Now, that kind of directs that, it's not only in the states or areas where the ruling party is strong that there was a fall in the vote share. So because of which I'm not able to say with a fair degree of conviction that, this particular drop in vote share is pointing towards one side or the other.
Even the number was revised eventually.
Correct.
So that entire argument then fizzled out.
Correct. But all in all, see, I don't think markets will take it negatively if the incumbents come back to power. So as of now, I think what the market is priced in is somewhere around 300 for the alliance as such. Anything towards 330.
300 for the alliance.
For the alliance, yes.
You're saying that's what the market is pricing in. Andrew, you agree with
Yes.
that? A number of 300 for the alliance and not for the incumbent party alone. You think the market is pricing that in, and any surprise out there might actually bring a positive trigger for the market?
Yeah, anything above that would be a positive for the markets.
Okay. How are your portfolios adjusted, Andrew? Because you can do long, you can do short, you can sit on cash. So I'm just trying to understand, how are you guys doing on your portfolios when it comes to these numbers? It'll be interesting
It's
to
a
know
little
that.
early cause I think next week we'll kind of decide on how we want to play all of that. So this week is this week, right? And, I think the markets are showing you that there's some confidence that things are going to be better than they were 2 weeks ago at least. I think the other thing to really kind of think about is all of this selling by foreign investors. If the incumbent government comes in, so then there'll be two things that will happen. One will say, okay, what's the first 100 days going to look like, right? And I think they're just going to spend, right? Because they've now got this windfall from RBI. You'll have interest rates coming down because the bond yields will fall, which is good for banks. That's your biggest short in the market is banks. If that turns around, that's just huge. And we've seen that in the results, the NIMs are kind of towards the bottom of the kind of worst case scenario now, and things will only get better. So the banking sector will be the one that leads the whole market higher, is my view.
Andrew, I'm wondering, is that repetition? Like, for example, you said this week is this week, we'll see what happens next week, and you see markets are now more positive than before. Some of that nervousness has ended. It hasn't yet moved to a full-out optimistic move. There are still enough fence sitters. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
You see, you had that huge rally at the end of November.
True.
After the state elections, which took us some of that pre-market rally, pre-election rally away from us, right? Because usually you have that kind of just a few months before. Then you had those jitters in between. I think the market's just saying, okay, we'll wait. Now we're okay to just wait and see what the results are. We're okay, we think it's going to happen. Government will come in, policies will be the same, and now you have this windfall from the RBI, so you have that extra, to my mind, leg for the market to move higher if these results come the way we think they're going to come.
Well, that's 4 times in the interview that Andrew has mentioned the RBI windfall. It clearly gives a
He's
lot of
most
importance.
excited about it rather than anyone else today.
Yeah, clearly. And nobody that we've spoken to, Andrew, thus far is so constructive on this piece, on the spending part as you are.
Okay. I think after the elections, we're all going to focus only on one thing, which we do every year anyway. Is the budget.
Budget.
The budget,
Right.
yeah.
And that's where I think the worries are going to start creeping in about capital gains tax being increased. We think, there could be some movement in arbitrage funds in terms of tax there. I mean, the banks are trying to get fixed deposits, and you've got an instrument which is taxed like equity, but is a risk, like a bond, free risk instrument. So we think there'll be changes. Market might not like anything to do with capital gains tax increases.
If we can, and I don't know if we can, but we'll try and play out a bite of PM Modi in his interview that he gave to the NDTV network editor-in-chief Sanjay Pugalia, wherein he spoke about taxation. But you can either correlate it to capital gains or not, but his unequivocal view was that they believe, he seemed to say that they believe that keeping taxes lower gets in more people in the tax net, and that is maybe more desirable as opposed to having higher taxation. I wonder if markets think like that it may not necessarily be the first port of call of the new government that let's raise capital gains tax.
So there's been, in the last budget in February, there was a lot of rumors going around that they're going to reduce personal income tax, so everyone benefits, but increase capital gains tax because it's a smaller amount of people who will be affected.
Yeah, let's see. Nandik, you think like that too?
Yeah, so I'm in the same camp. The reason is they'll do something in the budget to take stress away from the low growth in bank deposits. So every year, so the amount of deposits which you have in the system is somewhere around 2 crores. So the incremental amount which comes every year is somewhere around 10% of that, 10 to 15%, around 20 lakh crores. Now, for example, arbitrage funds, which Andrew mentioned, technically they are short-term funds only, but they have much better taxation for almost zero risk in the portfolio. Now, if taxation around that, for example, remains where it is, the industry has grown from 50,000 crores to 2 lakh crores in 1 year. I'm very much sure the growth in the next year will be from 2 lakh crores to 5 lakh, 6 lakh crores. So that incremental 3 to 4 lakh crores will come from deposits, and that will put some pressure on bank deposits if this doesn't happen. So I think it's a low-hanging fruit. How they do it, how they do the definitions is a different thing altogether. But taking a step back, you mentioned about, we talking about 1 day each and then, elections are 10 days away. The reason is nowadays most of the volume which happens in market happens in index derivatives. And that too in the weekly option expiry segment.
Is that why you're saying cash volumes come down?
No, cash volumes have been same only. Cash volumes haven't come down per se, but that volume has gone up a lot.
Okay.
So that is the reason why, let's say 20 years back, if you were a fund manager, then you would have to act before the event happens. Now we don't have to actually do that because the volume in that segment is so huge that we can see how the news flow is happening, how the information is panning out. We can always adjust to new data points and then take positions. Even large positions can be built and unwound very quickly in that segment.
Okay, so you don't have to really necessarily take positions in advance.
Not 10 days in advance.
Not 10 days in
If you're doing stocks, then you say, okay, if the government comes in, would they spend money? Should I be in, infra stocks? Which sectors would be the big beneficiaries of
Actually,
government?
that's what we should start off the next segment with before we go into that break. What are those sectors? I'm also keen to understand whether you would have a sell-on news, because everyone has already penciled in what the outcome could possibly be. Once the event is done, What does the aftermath look like? All of that after the break. But as we go into that break, we'll just play out that statement by Prime Minister Modi in the exclusive interview to NDTV that Neeraj spoke about and how he looks at taxation.
जैसे 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 टैक्सेशन आप कम करोगे आपका रेवेन्यू बढ़ता जाएगा जी। लोग ज़्यादा, आप देखिए करीब करीब डबल लोग हमारे इनकम टैक्स भरने वालों की संख्या हो रही है। जीएसटी रजिस्ट्रेशन में बहुत बड़ी संख्या बढ़ रही है क्योंकि उनको भरोसा भी सरकार की तरफ से कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, तो लोग और देश के लिए दूसरा उसको विश्वास है कि मेरा पैसा टैक्स पेयर का पैसा बहुत ही होगा। दूसरा है वेलफेयर का विषय। मैं वेलफेयर को एक प्रकार से भारत के सोशल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का एक बहुत बड़ा महत्व का हिस्सा मानता हूं। अगर हम वेलफेयर स्कीम को टारगेटेड करें और क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ के साथ जोड़ के करें तो वो एसेट बन जाती है। और आपने देखा होगा कि मेरे हर काम में वेलफेयर स्कीम उनके लिए एक क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ की गारंटी बनती है। और फिर उसको अच्छा वो बार अच्छी ज़िंदगी जीने की आदत लग जाए तो अच्छी ज़िंदगी जीने के लिए वो खुद भी प्रयास करता है जी। तो मेरी वेलफेयर स्कीम का सारा मतलब ये है। अब जैसे मैं अनाज तो मुफ्त देता हूँ लेकिन साथ साथ मैं पोषक आहार पर बल देता हूँ। तो पोषक आहार में उसको भी कुछ ना कुछ कॉन्शियस देता है, जोड़ता है क्योंकि मैं हेल्दी बच्चे चाहिए, मेरे देश को हेल्दी चाइल्डहुड चाहिए, वही मेरे देश के को हेल्दी भविष्य देगा।
Now that there seems to be consensus on what the outcome could likely be on June 4th, what next becomes the question. We know that there is going to be a push on capex, spend, etc. Do you go back to those same sort of sectors and companies that have seen that flow coming in? Are there new stories to be discovered?
No, so I believe that what next part, a lot of FIIs may have lightened their position, not just because of Indian elections, but also because China is cheaper. So you had two events happening simultaneously. China also turned cheap, and together with that, we had Indian elections. So if you're a fund manager managing, let's say, a multi-asset portfolio, then you have to show some risk management. So they may have lightened the position, because of which earlier we were mentioning if it's a 325, 350 kind of a number, there could be some sharp bounce back. And the sectors which will lead will be the traditional segments. So, high beta sectors will do well. Defense already has done well. If consumption increases, then possibly this time we may not see an FMCG rally because, the valuations already are so high. But you will have a scenario where at least for the next, so after the event, if let's say the numbers are what we are expecting the numbers to be, not meaningfully different from 2019, then you could have the entire pack moving together. It's very tough for me to visualize a particular sector doing extraordinarily well compared to the benchmark.
And you seem to believe banks which have not done well could actually lead.
Of course,
you reckon that will happen?
Because banks have underperformed by 18% in the last 12 months. And banks by definition are high beta. So I think banks will, and some amount of shorts have been there in the banking system.
Yeah, are you differentiating between PSU and private?
No, I think the entire pack will move together. Because PSUs have done comparatively better in the last 12 months. But then if you go back further 5 years, 6 years, then PSUs haven't done so well. So the pack as such will move up together if let's say the numbers hold where they are.
What about your defense, fertilizer, your more infra plays?
So that's why I said the entire pack will move together. Yes. So and they have done well the last 12, 24 months. These names have done well. And people who invest in these names typically don't do profit booking in, let's say, 12, 24 months. So the investors in these kind of stocks are there for the long haul. So you may not see profit booking also in these kind of names.
I think on the banking sector, just to add, on the PSU banks in particular, to my mind, it's always a part of the sector which I like to kind of rent, not own in particular. But if bond yields are falling, which I think they will, right? Then the huge bond portfolio these banks have is just an extra kind of reason to buy because of the profits they'll make, and that gives them more liquidity and more money to kind of lend to companies. So this is the other thing the market's just not picking up at the moment because there's been so much selling by foreign investors in banking to really fund their China move. And China it's a very simple story, right? I mean, it's bottoming out. If you look at the China, the H shares in Hong Kong, they're up about, what, 10% or so? Usually the Chinese market will follow that up. So there's that big fear of missing out on a very cheap market, and India's just being used as a funding vehicle to do that in the short term.
That's a valid point. Andrew, the other aspect is how we're seeing dichotomous moves in that we don't usually see very expensive MNCs rise parallelly with very expensive PSU stocks, right? That, to my mind, hasn't happened thus far in the last 18, 19 years that I have looked at the markets. This is arguably the first time that we've seen PSU stocks having a really strong rally. And these MNC names, I mean, whether in the capital markets or rather the capital good plays or power plays, having an exceptional run and egregious valuations.
Yeah.
What gives first? I mean, do you think somebody will blink on these stocks, or do you think they continue to do well along with PSUs?
See, I think the PSUs lend itself to, you know, if you take the defense, some of the renewables, it lends itself to those PSU companies, right? So there's no real kind of other companies, private multinationals, which you can play in. On infrastructure, I think everyone's taken the decision that, do you want to be in the, you know, the real kind of roads and bridges type of building, which is low margin, or do you want to be in the smart cities, smart manufacturing, railways type of, you know, spending? Yeah. And that's where you've seen those multiples rise, because the margins, I mean, you know, not as I'm commenting on companies in particular, but Siemens and ABB's was just, it was a knockout pair of results.
Exactly.
I mean, they were huge. And of course, you know, earnings get upgraded, and then the first 100 days, you're going to see more spending in these companies. Yeah. So order books move share prices, execution's the key.
Let me just drill down to that conversation about PSU banks, Andrew, on how do you make that choice on what will look good and actually grow here? Do you look at the mid-level banks? Do you stick to the safe and secure sort of SBIs? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination. It's a bit like if you've got your own portfolio, you'll be saying, I want some of the large cap banks, I want some of the mid cap, and some of the kind of NBFCs or new age kind of financials, and you put, you know, maybe 70 towards your larger banks, and then you know, skew it down to maybe, you know, 10% towards the new age banks which are coming through. So that's the way you kind of play it in terms of the portfolio stance. But I think you've got to be with the big banks, because that's where you're going to get the extra bang for your buck when you invest there. Because if all underperformed, there's a huge short covering to come, and if bond yields do fall, it's an extra bonanza for them.
Okay. Nandik, final word. Any cautionary pieces on the numbers, because you've done numbers so well? Any cautionary pieces there?
No, so the funniest argument which I have heard is, you know, in 2004 also, the ruling party won those 3 states, so Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and then they came into elections. This time also they have won the 3 states. And in 2003, Australia won the World Cup, beating India, and in 2023, Australia has beaten India in the World Cup. So, you know.
Wow.
So,
so you're looking at all these memes. Seriously.
So, you know, so I think the numbers are fairly comfortable. See, even 2019 numbers in hindsight look, you know, it was a wave election. But if you go and look at the videos of all the big anchors before 2019, even they were trying to make a contest. Rafael,
no,
this,
so
that.
2019 was a different story, because you had the opposition winning those 3 states.
Correct.
In December.
Correct.
So that was a different thing, and then you had the national security sort of thing.
Correct.
There is no huge one issue right now. So
it's very tough for me to visualize that they do well in states, but they do badly in center, because I think people vote nationally at center elections. The best example I can give you is UP. People only focus on 2014 and 19, but in 2009 also UP gave Congress 21 seats. Now Congress winning 21 seats in UP is a big thing in 2009. So the last 3 election cycles, the biggest state in India has followed the national pattern. So in my framework, it's tough to believe that, you know, local issues dominate national elections in Lok Sabha.
Fair point. Gentlemen, out of time completely, but lovely having you in the studios. Thanks for taking the time and being with us on Talking Point.
Thank you so much.
And viewers, thanks for tuning into this conversation.